Oh, speaking of it,
And we're recording. So if anybody doesn't have it open, I'll paste the agenda into the docs here. So I did put two things into the discussion topics. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to share up front?
Matt, is that you who just typed in?
What? Yeah, I just put in the two things into the discussion topics.
Okay, cool.
All right.
It's funny because I actually wanted to ask about that. Do you mind muting? I think we're getting a lot of noise. Cheers. Yeah, I was actually going to ask about the calendar invite and maybe sharing it to the SIGAP's mailing list.
Sure. Do you want to do this one real quick first?
Yeah.
So with a calendar invite, SIGAPS was set up a long time ago, pre the way we do things now, and we just corrected that because Michelle used to own that calendar invite under a Deis account. She didn't control anymore, and so we had to go clean things up. And when we did it, we set things up properly this time. And in doing so, we end up now having a SIGAPS calendar that's shared amongst a whole bunch of people. And since the charts technically falls under that, I was wondering what y'all thought about putting this on that same calendar. Now, that does mean that everybody who signed up for the SIGAPS mailing list will get notified of this meeting. So before we moved it over, all right, that sounds like Vic's a thumbs up.
Yeah,
Anybody else?
I'm definitely in favor of that. I think more visibility is better.
Okay.
And actually, that reminds me, slightly related, is the Helm dev call also on the calendar, or do we need to add it still, Matt?
That's what we were going to talk about in the next Helm meeting.
Okay.
I was going to put it on there.
Cool.
All right, so I put down that you or I, Adnan, have it to move it to the SIGAPS calendar. I'm actually think you control the invite today. Is that right?
Yes, but it's just on the same calendar that we have the SIGAPS meeting, so you should be able to control it as well. But I can certainly add it.
Oh no, yeah. What I was going to say is could you move it, just the one you have today, over to that other calendar? The one I recently shared with you?
So I think I created it in that calendar, unless I did something wrong.
Did you? Okay. I'll double check. Okay.
Yeah.
We can follow up afterwards. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was owners files. And the two reasons I wanted to talk about owners files is, one, they're probably about ready to be able to turn on Prow doing owner stuff for us. They've been testing it in a few places, and some projects have already taken it on. And so I was actually liking to shoot for doing the migration the week after KubeCon to enable owners files on the charts repo. But that means that we have to generate a whole lot of owners files here, which is a whole lot of bumped charts versions and Helm ignore files altered and all that stuff, right? And so what I was looking to say is, should we do this in one PR that affects everything, or is there another way we should do it to add owners files everywhere?
I think it would be easy to try to get folks on or at least a couple of us on a hour-long call to just work through it and do them one at a time, and have them run through the tests and just kind of have a pipeline of all of them running, rather than blast the 99 PRs or whatever it's going to be, or the 99 changes at once, and then have the CI test it all together.
That said, this isn't really a functional change in charts, so I wonder if it is okay to start off for this one.
And we are going to have a whole lot of CI fail, because there's a bunch of little ones that haven't been touched in a while that probably are going to fail on linting and stuff like that now.
Yeah.
Is this the time to just rock through it and fix the linting too? And I mean, if we do it with attention to detail on each one, then we get added benefits to at least maybe decide, do we even maybe want to start deprecating these things and not move them and actually just move them to a new folder, the long lost chart folder or something like that, because the big PR is going to be, I think, difficult to validate whether or not little changes have broken things or not. I mean, I guess technically we could make sure it's just Helm ignores and the chart file, and maybe that would be good enough.
Yeah, and I'm okay either way. It might take us, a couple hours in a week to go through all of these because there's a bunch of them, get a few of us together. And I'm totally on board with doing that. I just, I'm looking for what path should we do and who will be my cohort in getting this going.
I can definitely do at least an hour of just focused back and forth PR review. I think we can get a good chunk of them in an hour, and probably take at least 2. But we probably need a planning session before that to have a cadence for how to do it and stuff like that. So I'm happy to help out.
Is anybody else interested in jumping on a call with us when we do this?
Sure. Yeah, you can count me in.
I'm happy to help out where I can, but given time zone stuff, I may not be able to do it in sync. Maybe if I can help out, I can.
Okay. Subject to the vagaries of customer-facing work I have to do, I'm interested too.
Sweet.
Okay. So maybe let's look at when we should do it. If we look at the week of December 11th, which is the week after KubeCon.
That one's good for me. I'm off starting after that week. So
SIG Apps is actually canceled that day. Do we want to maybe take that same time slot and do it?
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, let's grab it.
I think you usually have a conflict during that.
Yeah, I do, but I'll try to just let them know early and reschedule that one.
Okay. So you think that'll work for you? Because we can do a different time. I was just trying to suggest a time that I knew people already had on their calendar.
Everybody's on board. Let's go for it. Yeah.
The other thing is we do have this time slot on alternating weeks, so actually that's a good time slot to use regularly if we want to do these kind of sprints.
Yep. Yeah, but for now, let's just stick with that Monday SIG app slot. I'm fine with that.
Okay, so that's Monday the 11th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Welcome. Are you going to KubeCon? So this is I'm back from KubeCon. The very first thing I'm going to do.
Start charging through the door.
Yeah, back from KubeCon. Let's do some Kubernetes stuff.
All right. And I can start trying to craft and start a doc and just share with everyone on here's kind of how we could go about doing it, and then we can alter it from there. So I'll take the to-do to start a coordination doc.
So I think we discussed in the email thread how this was going to work, but I just wanted to make sure that at least I remember exactly the workflow for it. So the idea is that this would allow maintainers of charts who are not necessarily Kubernetes org members to run commands like /lgtm, and then okay, and then would that then automatically merge after some time after the test pass? And do we have a merge robot now that can go and do that, or will we have a merge robot, or does someone else need to actually still go and merge those?
It's the Kubernetes merge robot that'll do it. It's part of the test infrastructure called Prow, and Prow will look for things like looks good to me and approve and be able to act appropriate on those and kick off the merge. It's entirely a piece of Prow functionality now. It used to be in something called Munge GitHub, and they moved it over to Prow. And so we should be able to do that. It'll look at things like owners files and collaborators. And so if you're not a member of the Kubernetes project, as many people aren't, we can add them as a read-only collaborator on this. and then that would put them on the collaborators list. So we could take people who aren't members and just say, you know what, we trust them enough, we can make them a merge only or a read only collaborator on this repo, and then it'll work and it'll give them the permission.
Okay, so that'll give them permission to talk to the bot, which the bot will then do the thing for them.
Yeah, and what the bot does is it actually says, is this person trusted? And they're not actually just going to look at the owner's file to see it. They actually want to make sure they're trusted by looking at the organizational settings. And all the bot does is it says, is this person a collaborator? Doesn't look at their level of permission, which means read-only will work.
Okay, so they need to be in both the owner's files and the collaborators.
Collaborators or a member of the org for Kubernetes org. And if we want to get a bunch of people as members of the org, there's a process we can go fire off. Here's a list of people. But in the basics, we can just make them a collaborator on the repo in a read-only capacity, and that's fine. That'll work too.
Okay. So we probably need to also gather a list of folks that we need to add to the collaborators list as well when we go through the owners.
Yeah. And some of this stuff is, in the meantime, I might say, what are these to-dos? What can we do to automate these? And some of them it'll be a little harder because we're going to have to go chase down their GitHub IDs as part of this. And so knowing if we've got a date coming, I might start doing some of this ahead of time. Or if I'm bored in my hotel at KubeCon, I might try and start gathering some of this information so we can automate it or see if there's an automated way to do this.
Yeah, and that's another thing, because some charts still haven't been updated to use GitHub IDs where the name should be. So that's something we can also include in this update.
Okay. So yeah, I'll start the doc and start just listing out some of these things. And if I gather information, I can link off to it. And others can do the same thing if y'all want to jump on board early too. I probably have more excitement to do that than some of you right now, but I really want to get this switched over because I think that'll alleviate pressure on us. Oh, the other thing we got to do is make the tests required. Right now, they're optional, and you can merge without it. We're going to have to flip the switch to make the tests required so people don't just start skirting them.
Yeah, and I think another thing we can do is add like a warning or something that we're going to want tests for the charts too. That's something that we have had in our back pocket as far as a quality measure, but not all charts, and probably only a handful actually implement a Helm test. So that's something that we can use to accelerate our kind of review process.
Yeah. Well, the two things that I had on my next to-dos were one were tests and charts, but I actually wanted to start linting the basically using Helm template to generate the output of charts statically, and then run them through a linter and do it for the N and N-1 versions just to make sure it works for both and that it validates on both. Nice. I think that would be a good static test we could do.
Yep.
So those are some. Go ahead.
Do we have any kind of coordination document that we can start going through charts right now and saying, like, this one doesn't have tests, this one doesn't have its GitHub ID as the owner, anything that needs to be marked?
I don't think we have anything like that at the moment. No. We probably should, and that's something that, if we do this kind of, one at a time kind of thing, we should have that list of spot checks to just bring them up to date, and maybe even just adding them to the linter if that's even possible.
Yeah, I think we can create like a quick enough spreadsheet to do that, and then just have that shared out so that everyone can.
Yeah. And some of this stuff's pretty easy to automate, given some of the GitHub APIs and things like that. We could do it.
Cool.
Just a suggestion, could we mandate that the test should be there for a stable chart? And could we move all the chart to incubator and then move them back one after the other to stable as and when we add test?
So maybe there's a little confusion, and this is something we might want to chat about. Stable and incubator aren't the state of the charts. They're the features they implement. And so stable doesn't implement alpha features. It's just stable features. And then incubator can implement things like alpha features and be a little bit more of a playground there. And I think that's the intent rather than the quality of the charts, which I think is confusing. But
I know. I mean, I'm saying that could we add this rule as well so that all these charts in stable could be like actually stable and are really tested?
we've talked about it for a while. Are we ready to maybe first quarter next year do it?
Yeah,
I don't know if we just want to
need
pull
a
the
little
trigger.
bit. Yeah, I think we need a little bit of time just to get things. I think we need to do an audit, something like Kenzie said there, right? Like audit everything, see where things lie. I think we'll see that there's probably a third of the charts that aren't at the same level as all the rest of them from an involvement, maintainership, and kind of update standpoint. So cut those out, put them in a special place, and then look at that next 2/3 of charts that we think are important for some reason or another, and then implement on those. So I think there's kind of a 2-phase thing we need to do, but it's similar to what you're talking about, Philip.
I was thinking about stable versus incubator as well, and didn't we just really talk about maybe if something goes into incubator, we want it like within a certain time frame to be promoted to stable or something, so that would rule out alpha actually. So the question is, do we really need incubator? Do we want it at all? Do we need a place where people can dump their half-baked stuff? So, I mean, why don't we just create a chart that meets stable, and when you're ready, create a PR for it?
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's transitioned to more or less a practice ground for charts. If people submit stuff to Incubator, I don't stop them from submitting it there anymore. If that's where they want it to be, that's fine. The only thing that stable gets you today over Incubator is that it gets into the main repository for Helm, right? So I don't know that that's a great feature or not for people.
I think originally, like the Incubator was kind of, we thought it'd be a good place for people to collaborate on things. Well, actually, initially, like there was a lot of alpha stuff that people wanted to use, and stateful set, for example, or pet set back then, right? So we wanted the place for that originally, but also we kind of saw it as a place where people could collaborate and work on things and slowly build them out. But we haven't really seen that happen, I guess, or at least happen very much. So yeah, I think you raise a good point. At this point, Kubernetes is a bit more stable as well, and there isn't really much need for the alpha stuff, right?
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't really make much of a difference in reviewing stable versus incubator. So
sure.
Then do we maybe change the designation that stable is things that we think are prime time for people to use, and incubator is the playground where you work stuff out to get it to be prime time?
I'm all for it.
Yeah, I'd put it more like this, yeah.
So does anybody want to take a to-do to go update the docs so that way it reflects that change?
Mm-hmm. I think we need to actually move things.
So move things and then update the docs?
Yeah, at the same time, when we know what things need to go where, because I think there's charts in Incubator that are okay to be in stable, and charts in stable that must be in Incubator.
Yes.
So until we actually make that happen, let's not change the docs. And that's, I think this effort, if we're going to take hours, many people hours of time to do one-by-one review of things, this should be one of those flags. Like, has it been updated in X time? Let's do a little report card kind of thing where we can say this one needs to go into Incubator or not, and make that very clear, because maybe someone's like, hey, why did mine get moved? I got moved out of the stable repo. The other thing we have to figure out is what to do with the charts that are in the stable repo from a Helm repository standpoint, because those live in there. They're in the index, that kind of thing. So what do we add a deprecated note or something like that, or to install the upgrade to this or whatever, go this repo or whatever. So there's a little bit of thought that needs to go into it.
Yeah, we have the deprecated field in Helm, but as far as I know, it still doesn't really actually tell the user that it's deprecated. It's mostly used in things like Monocular, which then ignore charts that are deprecated. But
gotcha.
That's something that we can change in Helm as well, so that it can actually treat deprecated charts as deprecated.
Sounds good. I added some notes to the docs on this, or to our meeting minutes for today, and the things we need to do. But yeah, that's a good idea.
Cool, thanks.
Do we want to, while we're doing this, since we're doing a kind of a comprehensive assessment at this point, do we want to go back and look at the old classic charts and look for things like, oh, there was a classic chart for this, but now there's actually a stable, updated chart. Do we want to keep the classic chart around anymore?
What do you mean by classic chart?
Well, so when I first started looking at Helm charts, there was a stable repo, and then there was an old deprecated area where charts that had been written for Helm Classic were kind of stashed. And that was actually what I started off with. Was I have a PR going for Weave Scope, and there was a classic chart for Weave Scope, but it was so far out of date that it really wasn't worth even beginning with anymore. So I started from scratch.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, like, once, at some point in the future, my Weave Scope PR goes in and gets merged, do we want to keep the old, out of date, not really valid chart for Weave Scope around at that point?
Yeah, I'd say same time if we know it does, but as long I think we focus on our repo. I think what you're referencing is a different repo. Is that right?
Is it? It might be. Now that
Is
you
it
mention
Charts repo?
Yeah, Helm/charts.
Yeah, I think you're
One
right.
classic isn't that like the pre 2.0 Helm?
Yeah, or maybe Deus.
Is anybody still using this at all?
Yeah, Deus had what was it? Where was that one? Helm?
I'm pretty sure it was Helm/charts.
Yeah, obsolete. Okay, yeah. Helm/charts has a bunch, and it has a big warning on it. So.
Yeah, it says it's obsolete. These are all dead.
Yeah, and Weave Scope is there, so I'm guessing that's what you were talking about, Kenzie. So I think
exactly.
I think we leave that for archaeological reasons. We leave it, but I think it's well warninged and referencing our new repo.
Fair enough.
Hey, Scott.
Hello?
Hello. So, what else do we have to talk about today?
I added a point here. I guess we're going to delegation. So I know we cared about this a little bit, and I think it kind of went away a little bit. Has there been any movement on that?
So I have done some form of delegation for the service catalog. Basically, I set up a repo for them, a separate repo, and they have their own CI job that when they commit, it pulls that chart, commit a tag, it pulls that chart and pushes it up to their repo. So that's a mechanism. I think we could add more to that if needed. One thing I would want to figure out is if Prow can do post-submit stuff for us. I don't think it does any post-submit today. And then we would just bake that into Prow to push to the right repositories for the chart. Did you have a particular one that you think should get delegated? Adnan?
So I think it makes sense to start with one and have it fully integrated, and then move on to others. I think the service catalog one is a great one to start with.
So I have the delegation doc. I'm gonna link it in there, and if people have, this was the proposal from a while ago, and if people have any comments, they can add them there. But basically, the idea is to have some sort of meta repo information where people can add, some entries into there that say which are the up-to-date tags for their or references for their Git repo and where the chart lives, and then we will take and extract that chart, run it through our CI, and then publish it to our charts repo. That was the original pass. I just hadn't had time to work on that mechanism.
Okay, where's the doc again? Can you drop it in here?
Yeah, I just dropped the link for delegation.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I see it in there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, where is the link? Not in the chat, right? Or
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's in the doc that the meeting minutes.
oh, okay, got it. Thank you.
Cool. I see it.
Hi. I want to bring up two things. One is that it's a long overdue that I want to move a couple of charts. I mean, actually, more than a couple, few charts which are using deployments as their prime controller to stateful sets because they are all stateful in nature. So I would be doing that by this week. And the other one is about area of interest, because one other thing I felt as a maintainer coming and trying to help out the chart repo is that the number of PRs that are waiting to be reviewed, that's like 150, 200. The moment you see that number, it's like that's really demotivating. So, but there could be like a few charts which are really easy for me to start reviewing and move on. But there could be a lot of charts which I cannot actually start looking at right now. For instance, like RBAC, though I may not know anything about RBAC. So if that is the first chart I'm looking at, then I might not start reviewing it also. In order to motivate the chart maintainers, so I thought that could we introduce a concept of like area of interest, or the area in which the chart is actually being proposed or requires review in. So a PR creator could actually copy or add that label. Say, for instance, he could say that area is like persistence volume, or areas like security, or areas like apps, which might include affinity and all the code controllers. Then those can be selectively assigned to those people who have demonstrated interest in that area. So, I would have a lot of charts assigned to me that I can go and review automatically, and they're in that area. That would be easy for me. So what do you think about that?
So the only concern I have, I think that's a good idea. The only concern I have is having people who send the PRs add the labels. I don't know that that's gonna work. If we could find a way to automate that, then I think we could get the right labels on there. But in general, I don't think that they would be willing to add that extra effort or label it properly, for that matter. The other side is we could always have a, to your first point of like coming in and just wanting to review and not knowing what to do, we could have maybe a link in our README that goes to a filter that's like extra small PRs, for example. Our PRs are labeled by size right now, so we can say like, here's like 10 extra small PRs you could just look at, and here's what you're going to do, and have like a little bit of a kind of contributing from a reviewer standpoint guideline of, here is the steps that you're going to take to review these PRs, and then do this, that, and the other, and flag, charts maintainers or something like that, and say you reviewed it. So something for the onboarding process.
Also, and maybe here's a suggestion. So Reinhard started this great document called Review Guidelines, where we can document, here's the stuff if you're going to go review it, right? And so some of these areas where people aren't comfortable with, like RBAC, right? That's a complicated thing. If you know how to review RBAC or some of this stuff, can you do a PR against this file to add details on it to help others know what to look for, and maybe even cross-link off to Kubernetes docs for more reading, that kind of thing, so we can all help each other level up?
Yeah.
Because this is a
great
document.
idea. Yeah, I was going to say, oh, I'm sorry, Matt.
No, go ahead.
Okay, just that I do like the idea of having areas to look at. I also agree that it's not a good idea whatsoever to ask any users to label those themselves. I think that's just like Michael was saying, that's not gonna work. but however those get categorized, whether we label them or whether we just have a checklist, kind of like what Matt was saying, within our review guidelines, I think there are some areas that we want to almost have areas of common concerns that we want to make sure that we check off. We do have a label for UX review. I've noticed that's become almost a useless label. I don't want to solutionize right now about how it's done, but I think that, yeah, RBAC is one area. I think someone else mentioned persistence. Like whether we want to have, stateful set integration across our charts. I think one of the issues is that we don't have a ton of consistency in all of our charts yet. And so it's really hard for people to know even what needs to be included in a new chart, or what needs to be included in an existing chart to get it up to speed. I think that's something that it would be good for us to determine as
Yes, I mean, that's what I was trying to coming at. There is a small section in the actual Kubernetes core repo which says that how to cure PRs reviewed faster. So we could have a little section similar to that and say that if you have this and this requirement, then probably request for these labels. So I totally understand that. It's not. I mean, for a seasoned chart contributor, this wouldn't be a problem. He would know which area his chart needs to be reviewed for. But for somebody who's new, he wouldn't really know it. So I mean, we could look at whether we can take advantage of the straw to allow people to add labels themselves, or whoever is planning to screen this. The PRs at first, we could add the labels ourselves. I think that is how it is happening in the prime Kubernetes repo as well.
So I'm going to add, just to throw in here, we don't have, where Kubernetes has a lot of people to go do reviews. It's very easy to break down areas. We've only got a handful of people who are doing reviews right now, and some of them aren't necessarily strong in all of the different areas and comfortable in reviewing them. And so what we probably need first a set of guidelines. How do we bring up reviewers and help them to be able to do that? Because I mean, you could have RBAC, but if nobody's comfortable doing RBAC, or the one person who is goes on vacation, then all RBAC stuff stops. We really need to look at how do we help more people be able to review that, and maybe how do you automate as much of it as you can, and because there just aren't that many of us right now.
What we do have now is kind of a set of best practices. We have one for airbag, we have one for persistence. I guess we should probably document this somewhere. So, and this is already used in many charts now. Airbag style, like Michael invented it, I think, and how persistence and storage classes are configured. This is consistent in a lot of charts now, and this is something should probably be documented. And then I don't much about RBAC myself because I don't use it on my cluster, but I think I can now review it actually because I know how it's done.
Yeah.
Can you by chance go ahead, and could you by chance take the action to document how to do those two things in this wonderful document you created, and then the rest of us can go review it and learn something or provide feedback?
So I was gonna nominate myself to document the PVC stuff, PVC storage class stuff. So I'm happy to take that, and then if someone else wants to take RBAC, Ingress is another one I think that has kind of been standardized in some places, but not standardized in other places. So that's another one that we should definitely document.
Yeah, we've done a pretty good job of creating these best practices or these patterns, and then hammering people over the head with them, but we've not done a very good job at all of actually documenting them. So that, I think that would go a long way towards not having to hammer people with them over again.
Michael, what do you think about, and I guess everyone, what do you think about adding those to something central like ChartUtil create? How I did that with Ingress, and other people added some other pieces.
I think those definitely belong in the Helm create command. I think ultimately, they should be going. They should be going into the. I'm sorry, Adnan. What's the name of the?
Common.
Yeah, the common chart, and then we should be really, and then we can start hammering people to start using that, but it's.
I think that's the question: is where
Helm create and documentation.
Yeah, where is the canonical source? That was actually probably my first week looking into this. I was like, that was what I was like, just super focused on. And where I got to is that we don't know yet, but we're working toward it. And then that's why I focused my effort on ChartUtil, because it seemed like, well, it's baked into Helm. So,
so maybe there's. Yeah, maybe there's two things here. I think in the short term, the easiest, fastest win to enable us chart maintainers to review the stuff there is to get these areas documented. We've got a whole bunch of open PRs. Even if it were added to ChartUtil, that doesn't mean people are going to start using it immediately or be able to bake it into existing charts. So if we can get some of this stuff documented and taught, it'll enable a whole lot more people to actually review stuff, which will speed things up. And then there is baking it into something like ChartUtil, so in the future it's in better case. And I think that's a good idea too, to bake more of it over into ChartUtil. I like that.
So we can iterate. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, quick question. I was going to bring this up as a separate item, but it fits well here too. Do we have kind of worked out best practices for network policy yet?
That I'm aware of.
No, I mean,
I think that's another area, and probably an area that most of us are not very or all that familiar with. But yeah, that's again another one that we should definitely.
Yeah, because I feel like we've got at least I've seen things on some of this other stuff like Ingress and RBAC, and I've seen in the notes back on August 31st, network policies and charts was an agenda item, but I don't know that anything's actually been standardized there. So that's a discussion we should probably have at some point.
Yeah, network policy that's a huge can of worms, just because, no two networks are alike. RBAC, is, the API server is the same from cluster to cluster, but you start talking about network policy and, what should be allowed and what shouldn't.
I'm just wondering if maybe there's a lowest common denominator that we can say your chart, if it's a network exposed service, should create a network policy that allows access to that service. And then if people want to change that, that's fine. But do something that gives the lowest common denominator and the most common case that it will actually be accessible. Because I've seen, especially with a lot of the older charts where the RBAC stuff isn't in there, people are trying to use them now in RBAC enabled clusters and they don't work, whereas they used to work before because RBAC is blocking that action.
So let's maybe turn some of this actionable, because I like talking about this stuff, but what we really need is something documented. And then once it's documented, that's something maybe we can even look at writing tools against the charts repo to see who's missing it. We can do all kinds of neat stuff then. And so let's, in the charts meeting minutes and agenda, we've started to collect who is up for documenting which things. And so let me drop that back in here for anybody who missed it. If somebody's up for documenting this, and the place to document it is there's a file in the repo called the review guidelines. Could we get folks to just write up something for this and submit it as a PR, and then we can discuss it there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good idea.
I think we shouldn't make this file, the review guidelines, too big or too long. Rather link to best practices pages documenting RBAC, storage, network, whatever.
Can we do it like the chart best practices is, where each section is a separate file, but it all gets linked together?
So I think the review guidelines should just be a quick overview. That's also useful for contributors to see, oh, this is like in a nutshell what I have to look for when I create a PR.
Yeah, but it should also help anybody who's got a review know, okay, I'm going to do RBAC. I'm going to go read over here. Here's what I need to know about RBAC so I can get better at it, because we've got different areas of expertise. And that means some charts get reviewed more than others. Some are easy to get in. Some people go, you know what, I don't know how to review this, and I don't know where to learn how to review this. And so maybe if we can help people learn how to do this, that'll help with velocity, especially as we go to owners files and lots of people not knowing how to review these things. We need to be able to teach all of these different people who are going to be owners how to review this stuff and do it well, and what that means. And they need some place they can go to say, here's how I should do PVCs. Here's how I should do RBAC when I'm reviewing my own charts, and the changes to that and what it means. Because if we don't get it as a group, when we go to owners files, and you're going to have a whole lot more people doing it, a whole lot of them aren't going to know how to do this stuff either. And we need to help them be successful.
Agreed. Do we have good examples for each of these areas of concern that were brought up? Like, for instance, this chart does this well, this chart does this well. Because if we even bulleted those out, that would be a great start that I'd be happy to help with. I mean, already some of these areas I feel comfortable with, but not all. And I'd be happy to help with that documentation and getting us,
I know we have at least a basic example for RBAC, because I wrote that up for the chart best practices document, so we can pull that in.
Okay.
PVCs are pretty, I think at this point, like fairly consistent across most charts. Ingress, I think, some of the, I think WordPress, Drupal, those are the charts, at least that I know of, that have a pretty good ingress model. RBAC, I'm not sure actually. And I'm not sure about network policy either.
And since you know where the ingress stuff is, would you be up for doing something in the docs on that?
Yeah, I can do the English one as well.
Thank you.
And what about stateful sets? I know that that's something that most of the charts aren't quite there yet, but now we have support.
I think we have a couple of charts which are reasonably good in terms of having best practices in stateful sets. So I could link them up in the document as well.
Okay.
Awesome. So yeah, and you know what? May I make a suggestion that for the first pass, we can put it all into just one document, and then when we see what's there, we can see how we can break it up. I love having a better organizational structure, but I would rather have it all documented where we can find it, and then figure out how to better organize it afterwards, if that's okay. Just PRs against this
Absolutely.
doc.
What doc should we?
The review guidelines doc is where I would suggest.
All right.
And it's in the base of the repo, and I link to it in the charts meeting minutes, so you can find it, just like a PR against that file. This is great. I didn't imagine this conversation happening. This is wonderful. Whoever brought it up, thank you. So what else do we have to talk about?
I only have one other thing to just keep harping on before KubeCon is the CNCF application developer certification thing. We don't necessarily need to talk about that all together, but it would be great, I think, if anyone here, I know Matt, you and I talked about this a bit. I brought it up on the last SIGAPS call too. I just wanted to at least make you all aware that the action plan was, I'm supposed to help, I don't know, just either start some sort of a temporary channel in Slack or some sort of a thread where various people who are owners of the various apps within SIGAPS can just weigh in, because most of those people can't be there in person to help contribute to that certification, the application developer certification. And if it didn't, and I also mentioned your distinction earlier, Matt, about the difference between operators and application developers. When Michelle was on the call and she said, yes, that's great. We don't really necessarily all have a common language for that yet, but we would love to at least somehow bring that distinction into it. Anyway, I think it would be a missed opportunity if we didn't at least try to have a conversation about what we might want to make sure is addressed on that certification exam. And so I don't expect to do that during this call, but I just wanted to mention it so that you all know, if you didn't already.
Hi, Scott. I wanted to actually talk about this last time when you brought it up, which was yesterday, but I couldn't because I had bad network connection. The thing is that I'm part of that committee which is meeting this KubeCon, I think 2 days before KubeCon and 2 days after KubeCon.
Monday, yeah, yep.
But I don't think I would be able to contribute to that, because I think it only matters to people who are actually there, and they're not doing any video conference or anything that sort. The other thing is that for people who couldn't actually help them physically right now, we could also help them in terms of standardizing standardizing the marks for each questions, and trying to take in the alpha test and stuff like that. So I think there was the initial mailing list was sent out to those people who actually participated in CKA. So I was part of the CKA mailing list, so I got invited to that call. So I could forward that mailing list to you. So basically, whoever is interested, you have to sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, saying that you wouldn't release any of the questions or anything, things like that, and then you would be part of the committee. That's what I figured. So I should be able to forward that email to you. So then you will have the contact person, and then we can get this organized.
Yeah, I have that. I signed the NDA, and I'm going to be joining those. What my goal was just to try to connect with other, because I can't extend that invitation to anyone. I'm not on I'm not part of CNCF or the Linux Foundation or any of that. I can't do that. But I would like to just communicate ahead of time. That was what my goal was, just to make sure that if there were some important concerns or interests that people thought should at least be addressed, whether they're large-scale conceptual issues or linguist or semantic issues like what Matt brought up last time. Just that someone who is going to be there, like myself or you, can somehow bring that to that. That's all.
So you're asking us to tell you what we think should be on that, since we can't be there, and why, and give you pointers. Is that right?
Yeah. Pointers, I don't know about pointers.
Okay, so you want us to tell you what we think, so you may be able to represent it when we're there, or give you more data, right?
That's right. So that I and or Dilip, it sounds like am I pronouncing your name right?
Yeah.
Dilip, if you're going to be there as well, that we could at least just make sure that some of those things are brought up in the discussion and covered. There are that is the extent of it, from my point of view.
And if I understand it, go ahead.
Sorry, Matt. So my actual objection to that was that, this should be something that should be built from the feedback from the AppSig community, because we are the people who are trying to standardize or tell how the applications to be deployed and what are all the ways to deploy applications. But it appears that it is being done from those set of people who are not actually actively involved in SIG apps. So that was my first objection.
Yeah.
And to my surprise, I was the only person in that meeting nobody else from SIG apps when the meeting was held, like I think a couple of weeks ago. So that would be my first objection. So if there is a way that we could bring it up to our notice, and then we could have another set of NDA rolled out, and we could all participate, and then look at the questions, then that would be really helpful, because I see a lot of people taking that certification than CKA in my company. So I would love to participate in that and then see what should they know if they are certified in terms of application development in Kubernetes.
So let's turn this practical, because we got about 10 minutes left. Is there anything else besides this that we wanted to discuss today? I'm going to take silence as no. So a couple of things. One, SIG apps and people in my community have gone to Dan, both SIG apps and the App Dev working group. People there have told Dan, doing it this way and trying to hurry up and get it done, and not necessarily looping in a bunch of the apps people, is probably going to lead to something that doesn't hit home at first. In fact, the cluster operator exam has run into the same problem, where there were huge outcries over it in a very negative fashion when it first came out because of the content of it. And that same fear is here for the app dev certification. In fact, we don't even have the difference between an app developer and an app operator. Like, a developer and operator is the same role. And in some companies it is, and lots of others it isn't. And so all of this has actually been brought to Dan in this way of doing it, and they're driving ahead with it anyway. And so this is kind of out of our control, and the best we can do is look at influencing it as positive as we can. We've brought it up in SIG apps to say, hey, if anybody has the time and is capable of going, please sign up. We'll make the connection. Dan came and presented at SIG apps in order to kind of kickstart some of that going as well. We can't change whether or not they do it. The only thing that we can do is attempt to influence it to be the best first version possible. And then after that, they've said we will keep iterating to try to improve it. And so we've got a little bit of time here to say, what suggestions can we give them with background to say, here's a good take at a first version of it, and then see where it goes. Because changing the process, changing the direction will not happen.
Right. Sounds like we're on the same page. That's a better way of saying what I was attempting to say.
Oh, you did good. But so maybe just to get to brass tacks, some of the things that I would look at are, obviously, when do you choose to use or how do you do a stateful set deployment? Those things, what are those? How do you use them, and when do you use them? But also, because it's not just the test, there's a training that they want to go along with the test where they teach people how to do things. And so I'm looking at what's really going to be useful for people, and then how do you test it? And this is about app operation. If I understand it, basically the idea is we'll hand you something like a Node.js app, and now you figure out how to operate it in Kubernetes. That's the way they're approaching it. Not how do you build the app, but now how do you just run any app in Kubernetes? And so it is that app operator. And so I would say, how do you use which of the different kind of 4 workload API things in order to do it? But then look at how do you set the application up to use RBAC? RBAC's incredibly painful, and I suck at it, and a lot of people do. And so if there's going to be training focused around the exam, if we're able to really help, the training around RBAC, and I would say maybe ingress too. And maybe even network policy, like something about those in there, partially because it gets you into the training. And for anybody who's going to go take this, and I'll probably be included in that, it'll force me to really make sure I know what I'm doing. I think those are useful things. Some of the things that we talked about today is kind of the guidelines. Here's the areas we need reviewed in the charts. Those are also useful things to be included in this exam. And in the training for it, because I think that will help make people better. At least that's my 2 cents. And I'll shut up. Anybody else got any thoughts?
I just twinkle fingers up that. I support that message. Mainly, you know, like I believe that if some of us didn't talk about this ahead of time, you know, I'm not convinced that Helm or charts would even be discussed or included in that. You know what I mean? And I think that given that Helm is the package manager for Kubernetes, or at least build as such, it really should be part of that.
Yeah, and it might be worth having in there, how do you use Helm to package up your application? When do you use Helm? It might even be worth putting in here, how do you do Helm or just general Kubernetes objects in a CI toolchain? Right? So how do you tie it into some of these? I'm not sure how far we get into it, because then it starts to get opinionated on deployment processes. But how could you go about using some of these core standard tools in the CI toolchain? Or just in general, what are the base objects? I mean, it comes down to the basics. What are the base objects? How and when do you use them? And then after that, what's the next level tooling? And how and when would you use those? And this gets hard with it, the app operator stuff, because not everybody uses something like Helm. Lots of people do, but not everybody does. It's not completely pervasive, where the Kubernetes core objects are.
But that's and that's part of the question that I think is, that's a foundational distinction between an app operator and an app developer is not really fleshed out. If it is fleshed out, like based on what our conversation was, maybe you and others have done work on fleshing it out more, but I only saw one line mentioning it, and I don't think everybody even knows what the difference between those are. In fact, I don't fully, like, for example, does packaging up an app into a chart constitute an app operator, or is that the developer's job? You know, like, I don't even know, because it's new terminology for me.
And I might go write something like this up, because I mean, I've been around conversations on the distinction, and I've worked at companies with the distinction for a very long time, but I don't hear a lot of it in practical terms put out there, and I don't really read a lot of it in writing. Yeah, DevOps, that's a good thing. You know, it's traditional, Ben, you've got ops, and then you've got developers, and then you kind of got DevOps in the middle, and people on both sides, and SREs, right? Because SREs are the ones who do it in Go, and DevOps do it in what, Ruby?
Right.
And so it kind of depends. It's a role thing, right? I mean, some companies have their application developers also operate it. Some people have embedded people on the team who help with the operations, but it's shared. And it's that kind of same thing here. But it's, you know, not always just the person who writes the app. The people who write WordPress don't necessarily operate it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the people who write your add-on functionalities for your UI may not be the same people at your company who are going and operating that same WordPress site. You might have to, you know, one person does all the fancy UI stuff, and then somebody else goes ahead and operates it. And that's not an uncommon distinction. And I say that because WordPress is used in most of the Fortune 100 companies.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's my case. Okay.
Yeah, and I guess the question is including that distinction in the concept, or at least the discussions toward, well, let's just say, if the end goal is including, recommending including that concept in that certification exam, is that a valuable concept to have in there, or is that something that's outside of that scope, or should be?
My opinion is that the app developer is somebody who's writing an application, and he doesn't really care where the application is going to be deployed. It could be Heroku or Kubernetes or DCOS. If that is the role that the app developer is taking, then why should he be even bothered about Kubernetes or getting certified in Kubernetes? So when we mean that Kubernetes application developer, or in this context, it means that somebody who could deploy application in Kubernetes. So which means that who would want to operate the application. So I don't think, for me, it is very difficult to understand what is the role of an application developer inside Kubernetes. He could be dwelling without Kubernetes as well.
Yeah, in fact, one of the concerns that was brought up to me was, there isn't something special about writing an application to run in Kubernetes. You don't have to do any kind of magic. It can have config files. It can use environment variables. There's no special way to make it run in Kubernetes. You can make all kinds of stuff run in there. And by calling it the Kubernetes App Developer Certification, you might give people the impression that in order to write an application for Kubernetes, you have to do something special. Because app developers write the application, they're not necessarily the role that operates it, and that could cause confusion. And so this was conveyed to me by somebody, and I hadn't thought of it.
Well, what about people who are writing Kubernetes plugins and operators? Like is that considered apps? Is that part of what is within the scope of that exam? And I wonder about that, and I wonder if there's just too much of a gulf. Again, I'm not trying to just raise paradoxical questions. I'm just really practically speaking, like yes, like you said, like we can't stop them from doing the certification. I personally wasn't involved in those earlier conversations that you had with Dan, so I didn't even attempt to try to stop them. It just seemed to me like there was a lot of gray area and a lot of lack of clarity, And I'm glad that you invited him in last minute to discuss with the SIG-APPS group, because it gives all of us the opportunity to have these conversations. I guess I just wanted to, try to do that beforehand if we can.
I've started to think of it in basically 3 domains. There are applications that run in Kubernetes, there are applications that leverage Kubernetes, and then there are things that extend Kubernetes. So like the Prometheus operator would extend Kubernetes because it creates a resource type. Something that like the Elasticsearch has a plugin that uses the Kubernetes API to discover other masters. So there again, that's more than just running an application, but then something that just like, you're running a web server inside Kubernetes, like you said, it doesn't need any special capabilities or knowledge. It just knows I'm a web server. I have this environment. I see these files. I'm doing my job.
Yeah, and so we're getting a little depth in technical here. I don't know that the CNCF folks are going this depth and thinking about the technicalities of Kubernetes the way we are. I think they're looking at it as something pretty simple. We had a cluster operators certification, and quite frankly, there are a whole lot more people who are going to do apps in Kubernetes than run the clusters. And so it's a really big market. And if we call it app devs, that's a huge market. But what Dan told me that we're really looking at is grab something like a Node.js app and we hand it to you and you figure out how to operate it in the cluster. And so that's kind of where they're looking at. And this is marketing, this is sales, this is have a very wide certification for another group that is not this. And if you say app operators, that's even smaller than the app developers. They want to go broad with it is the impression that I'm picking up. And so I think a lot of the naming and terminology around it isn't to get technical in how we can do things in Kubernetes. It's really to go wide and get a whole lot of people certified, because that's kind of something that the Linux Foundation does, is certifications all over the place.
I see. Okay, so maybe this level of detail might be unnecessary, but it's interesting. Just to be clear, for a longer term goal, are you saying that CNCF intends to also add an operator cert, or did you mean
probably not? They don't even think about it that way. They think app devs. Did you know? So the Node.js project is under the Linux Foundation, and did you know that there's a Node.js application developer certification? I don't know anybody who's got it, but there is one, because they do this. This is something that the Linux Foundation does. They do lots and lots and lots of certifications, and app developers are far and wide groups. And so they are targeting lots of people who do this. Okay, there's no special way, so what can we focus on them doing? And so I would target as what's pragmatic for the wide variety of people. They probably won't rename it because that shrinks the target market. This is not a technical thing as far as being how do you be the most technically proficient. This is sales and marketing around certifications and training courses, right?
Did any of you take the administrator training, sir?
I know a lot of people who did, and nobody had good things to say about it.
I did. It was brutal, and I didn't pass it, but I got over 50%, so I counted that a win.
Yeah, another friend of mine
I
too is.
did it as well.
Go ahead.
I did it as well. I mean, I cleared the exam as well. So it's not like I was expecting something else and then it was something else in the question. So it had a lot of questions related to how create a jobs, create a deployment and stuff, and less about actually operating on the Kubernetes.
Right, and also from what I was told, just a lot of real world scenarios about how do you save something on fire. You know, essentially, was that your impression from taking it? You know,
True.
like
I mean, true. The format of the exam is totally interesting. I mean, they actually give you a real cluster and they ask you to debug and then fix it. So, and with the given time, if you could solve like a couple of them, then it would be awesome. If you could solve things like that in the real world in just 3 hours, it would be awesome. So the format is interesting, but a lot of questions. The first 20 questions were all related to creating, deploying applications, creating Nginx, and then creating a service on top of it. So things like that. So I wasn't really sure that can be categorized.
Let's not dig too far down into the actual exam content.
oh no. I was just basically what I'm thinking is just ultimately what is this exam, at least at a high level, even as you said, Matt, if the goal is largely sales, but also just to gain a wider adoption, that's still a decent goal. I mean, it may fine. So how should it be distinguished? And essentially, I'm just wondering, is there any value from the SIGOPS community weighing in? If so, what value can we bring? To help sort of extend that to be something that's not just the administrator exam.
Yeah, and I would just start by the bare basics, the kinds of things we talked about earlier today, needing to get documented in charts. But how are those things for bare Kubernetes objects, and how can people know how to use it? Because that'll then tailor the trainings to pass the exam, and then that makes the trainings useful to a wide group of people. And it's app operation, but it actually makes it useful for people to know how to operate their apps. And I think that would be useful as a first go.
And it sounds like we need it anyway. So. Great. Okay. Thank you, guys.
I just want to add one more small thing. I mean, I totally agree with what Matt said about creating a positive influence. So to add to that, one of the scenario that we should look at is that whoever is getting certified as Kubernetes certified application developer, they should at least know when should they use what sort of workload. So. When should they use stateful set? When should they use deployment? When should they use jobs? That should be very clear. So somebody who's coming out of that certification, I should be confident that they would use the right controller for the right workload.
Great points. All right, we are over time. So thank you everyone for staying long. Once this video is done, I will put it up online and link to it in this doc.